Okay, so before we get started today, I wanted to walk you through a couple important things about using the remote desktop system here at DVC, and then we'll get into the regular lecture itself. But to get started, I've gone ahead and I've logged in already to the idm.dvc.edu, or also known as the remote desktop. I've logged in here, and I went ahead and chose the client view. So I have another tutorial that walks through choosing the client view versus the web browser view. We want to make sure that we're in the client view, which is currently the view that I'm showing you, and hopefully how you're accessing it. And the question revolved around how do we deal with saving our files and working with our files. This is something that's a little bit more challenging than if it's just locally on a computer. A couple things to note: I run a Mac on my my regular computer is a Mac, so when I log in, it's going to look slightly different for those of you that are logging in via a PC, but it's kind of in the same vein. So a couple things I want to point out. One, when we open AutoCAD, which is what you guys are working in right now, I want to open the regular AutoCAD. So this is AutoCAD 2019 English. That's what I will open as I work through the various exercises, etc. Now that I have that opening in the background, I want to talk a little bit about the file structure. So if I open up the documents folder here on this computer, we can see over on the left side here we've got the quick access. These are things that are locally on the computer that's at DVC. And if we come down here under this PC, if we keep scrolling down a bit, you'll get to a point where you'll see, in this case it says Grant Adams on Grant's MacBook Pro. That's drive X. That's my actual Mac computer. I also have two external hard drives plugged into this computer. One is called Black Tea. That's also available to me, and one is called Boot Camp. That's also available to me as well. So if I was working off of one of my flash drives or an external hard drive, I would click on one of those drives there. Or if I was working directly off my computer, say my documents folder, I would click on my computer here. Now when I click on my computer, I could then go to my school folder that has my various exercises in it. Let's see, I have them stored under live demonstrations, and then we could go into 135 exercises. And this would be where my folders exist. So here we are under 119. And this is, if I can double click correctly here, this is where my exercise 119 folder would exist. Now, I've got a little bit of a delay here because this is technically a OneDrive, so it's downloading information on the fly for me. So that's where all of my files are. I could open an AutoCAD plan directly from here. Now, we have another option that's available to you as well. This one works sometimes, doesn't work other times. It might be correct for your circumstance, it might not be. If you're working in a single AutoCAD file, it really doesn't make much difference. You can go ahead and open it directly. But the other option is to actually log in and use OneDrive to sync some files. And I would encourage you not to sync all of your files on your OneDrive. Be very specific about what you're choosing. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and sign into OneDrive. So I've come down here by the clock, and I've clicked on the OneDrive icon, which is currently a cloud with a slash through it. I'll go ahead and click on the sign in button right here, and it's going to ask me to set up my OneDrive account. Now, I already have a OneDrive account. This would be your Insight email address. Mine's a little bit different than yours because it's a faculty account. So I have something with 4CD in it. You guys would have your Insight. And I'll go ahead and click on sign in. This, for the purposes of accessing OneDrive, is a work or school account. It's then going to ask me for my password. I'm going to go ahead and copy that password in. And then we'll sign in. And a couple things to work through. The default location here is fine, so we'll go ahead and click on next. If we were in person, I'd be changing that default location, but I'm not because we're not in person. And let's see, we're not going to back up my folders here. We'll go ahead and click on skip. We'll click on next. We'll click on next. And here, this is an important one. This is, do we want all our files or do we want them to be on demand? I strongly encourage you to do online only here. These files don't take up space on this device and they're downloaded as you use them. So that's what we want. We want to make sure that we're doing the online only. Let's click next, and then we can click on later, and we'll open my OneDrive folder. Now, as soon as this opens, the first thing I want to do is I want to select everything in here and make sure that it's set to online only. So I'll right click on the files and I'll come down here and we want to free up space. And that will go through and apply the properties to all of our files. And it might take a little bit of time. And this means that it's not actually downloading anything onto the school computer. It's just going to enable sync for us. Now, this is not the kind of thing that I would set up for a short session. If I was going to work for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I wouldn't do it. But if I'm going to work for a longer period of time, or I'm going to use block referenced files like you're going to do today, it makes sense to really set this up and use your files from here. So it's going to take a little bit of time to apply. And there we go. I cut out a little bit of time in the video there, so there might have been a bit of a jump. But once I have everything and I've got that applied, that property applied to it to free up my space, I can go into my folder for today. I can go to, let's see here, we're at 119. Notice this moves a little bit faster than when I'm accessing my computer itself, right? And so there's the folder for 119 for today. And when I have that folder selected, I can right click on it and say always keep on this device. That will keep everything in this folder locally and backed up for this particular session. And so from then I could go ahead and go in and start beginning on my exercise for today. So the other half of this, though, is once I'm done working on my files, how do I disconnect from OneDrive and kind of finish the session before actually logging off or closing the remote desktop? Now, of course, there are going to be times where the remote desktop crashes or kicks you out, etc., in which case, hopefully, everything's been backed up and synced to OneDrive so you won't lose anything. But in the case now, or at least in my demonstration here, I want to assume for the moment that I've actually finished working in this particular session. I need to move on and do something else. So I want to disconnect from the remote desktop machine. So in that case, first thing I want to do is come down by the clock here, click the up arrow, and make sure that I can look at my OneDrive and that my OneDrive is up to date. If it's not up to date, that could present a problem because not all of my files have finished syncing. So in that case, you want to make sure it finishes syncing before you actually disconnect. So in my case, right here in this demonstration, the OneDrive folder is up to date. That's what I'm looking for. Now that it's up to date, I'm going to come down and click on the Help and Settings button. And instead of just clicking on Closing OneDrive, I want to actually go to the Settings menu here. And I'll click on Settings. And right there, I'm going to click on this Unlink PC. And this is actually going to disconnect this remote desktop from your OneDrive folder. So I'll go ahead and click on Unlink this PC. Yes, go ahead and unlink my account. And this takes a little bit of time. And again, you would only do this after everything has been synced correctly. And we should be able to come down here, and it's going to take a minute to make sure that the sync has finished. It's currently signing out, and yep, there we go. Now it's signed out. Once that's done, I can close all of my folders, and I can go ahead and disconnect from the remote desktop right there. I could also click up here in the little power cord button and disconnect from the client as well. I've pulled up a sample floor plan of a building that I'm going to start working on. The idea here is that we're going to kind of clean up the drawing. We're going to make it look good. We're going to work on some line weights, get the line weights to look good, and really make a nice quality floor plan. And then we'll move on to the elevations and continue in that vein. The good news is it gives you a little bit of extra time if you feel like your plan isn't quite resolved yet. You want to kind of work through some changes. That's okay. Today it's going to be about improving the readability of the plan. If you flip the sheet over, you'll see on the back of the sheet, and I have it right here so that we can see it, I hope. Come on. It's always nice when they don't make it as big as I would like. I have on the back of your sheet an example of typical line weights for a particular drawing. So we're going to come back and we'll refer to it. This is by no means the law. You can choose your own line weights. This is just kind of a guide to kind of help you get settled. And I've used the plan that we used in the very first exercise in AutoCAD. And so I'll go through how we change these line weights, etc. But before we get to that, we're going to talk first about layers today. So I'll come back to this little graphic here and we'll talk through it in a bit. But first thing I want to do is I want to talk through kind of how layers are structured in AutoCAD and the importance of layers, etc. Before I do that, though, I need to open up my, my workspace and change from the 3D modeling to the drafting and annotation mode here. There we go. So that it looks more like a 2D AutoCAD setup, which is what we're going to be working in. And I briefly touched on the idea of layers in the first introductory class, but I want to spend a little bit more time talking through layers. So what I'll have you do is in the Layers section of the Home ribbon, I'll click on this large button called Layer Properties. And when you click on that Layer Properties, it will bring up the Layer Properties Manager, this window here, which is actually a floating window. It can dock over to the side. You could choose to have it dock onto the side to keep it up, though personally I just open it when I need it and close it when I don't need it. It's a personal preference in terms of how you want to work. And as we look at this, I'm going to drag this over a little bit to make it bigger. When we have our layer properties, there's a lot of stuff going on in this Layer Properties Manager. The two important things right now are we have two layers that are by default set up for us to be working with. The first one is Layer 0. Layer 0 will always be in AutoCAD. You can't delete Layer 0. It will just always exist. It's a default layer in AutoCAD, and it is what it is. Below that, we have the topography layer. This was the layer that I put the topography on for you. Some of you may have drawn your plan on the topography layer. That's fine for right now. We're going to modify it and make some changes on layer structure, etc. Now, next to each one of these layers, so if I look at Layer 0 here, as I come over, there are several different on and off toggles going forward. The first one here is a little light bulb. And this little light bulb is technically an on and an off. I'll use the topography layer as the example here. So if I were to click the light bulb, that particular layer would go off. Seems pretty self-explanatory, on and off. Next to it, I have a little sun icon. And if I were to click on the sun icon, the same thing happens. And so the logical question here would be, why do I have two different options? The truth here is that this is a holdover from a long, long time ago in AutoCAD. It was actually important back in, let's say, 1996 to have an on and off and a freeze thaw because of how the drawings affected the computer and how much memory. So if you think back, some of you probably weren't even born in 1996, but in 1996 we were running like Pentium 1s or Pentium 2s, and they had a grand total of like, maybe 64 megabytes of RAM. Like, they were pretty low-end computers compared to today's standard. And so doing a graphic drawing that was complicated in AutoCAD could be very taxing on the computer. Right now, it's not taxing whatsoever on the computer. The computers can breeze through this and it doesn't matter. But in that time, we needed to be able to turn on and off layers, which is what the light bulb does. And that just chooses to display a layer or not display a layer. Freezing and thawing, the next column here, would actually take what you turned off and take it out of the system's memory. It would completely remove it so that you had more to work with. So like I said right now, it doesn't really make any difference. The computers are so powerful compared to what you're drawing that it doesn't really matter whether you choose to freeze and thaw or to turn on and turn off. Some of us, like me, who learned AutoCAD back in the 90s, learned that this was really important. And so we got used to freezing and thawing layers rather than turning on and turning off layers because it was beneficial to the computer. For your purposes, I could care less which one you use. But they are both there, etc. The next column here is a little padlock. This is the lock or unlock on a specific layer. When you click the padlock, it kind of grays out the content that's on that layer. You can still select it, you can still snap to it, but you can't delete it, move it, modify it, etc. So that can be beneficial sometimes. The next one over here is a little printer icon. It looks like a little printer. And that chooses whether or not the layer will print. Doesn't really matter for what we're doing today, but when we get into layouts, this is actually something that's important to be able to choose to have a layer that doesn't print. because sometimes you want content that you see on the screen that won't end up printing long term. Next column here would be the color. Notice that the color is set on both of these to white. I want to point out that there is a distinct difference between this, which is index color 7, which is considered to be white, and say this color down here, which is index color 255. It still looks like white. But this white, when you go to print, will be white. It won't flip to black. So you want to make sure that you're using this index color 7, which is white on the screen but will flip to black later on. Okay, so I just want to point out there's a difference. Some of you, when you get to the layouts, when we do that a little bit later on, you will have made that mistake and you'll say, well, wait, why aren't my lines showing up? And that's usually the reason. So anyway, I'll point those out. You are more than welcome to choose any color you want. This is also a good place to kind of talk about colors and AutoCAD. Colors can be really useful to identify what you're drawing, etc. Some firms, and this again is dependent on your firms, we're going to talk about layer names in just a second, but depending on what firm you choose to work with, they sometimes assign line weights by color. And so instead of assigning line weights visually, which is what we'll do in this class, they'll assign by color. They'll say a green line is, a 0.18 line. And so all the objects that are green are that line weight. If you work in a firm and you work on AutoCAD long enough, you start to see the drawing with line weights based on color, assuming that it's consistent. Now the problem is all firms aren't consistent. They don't all use the same colors, so things change depending on who you're working for. So in this class, and while you're in school, I would encourage you not to try to assign line weights by color, because when you go to work for a firm, they're going to tell you this is how we want to do it. So I caution you against it. Do it visually for right now. When it comes to actually working and drawing, if you want to temporarily change a layer's color, there's nothing wrong with that. It helps you see what's on what layer, what's on a different layer. So for example, I could change the topography layer to red. And when I change that topography layer to red, all my topo lines will show up as red. Red's a little bit harder for you guys to see on the screen, so instead I'll change my topo lines to cyan. And I think you guys can see those a little bit better on the screen. So what you choose for your layer colors doesn't really matter. It's completely up to you. Next one over is called line type. And these line types are currently set to continuous. It's just a solid line. We will eventually get to the point where we change our line types. Currently, I only have a solid line loaded. If I click on the line type here, so I'm clicking on where it says continuous, I can then click on load. And from there, I can load a bunch of line types, whether they're dashes, dots, etc. The ones that I particularly like are this hidden 0.5x. I think that one tends to look really nice. I use that one frequently. The rest of them, it's kind of up to you if you want something specific. But the hidden 2 line, which is actually hidden 0.5x, I think works pretty nicely. And when you say OK here, it will then load as a choice. So you could choose to make this layer all in the hidden 2. For example. Now I'll point out here that in model space in AutoCAD, so we're in model space right now with the black background, your line types are not going to show up. So you won't see the dashed line yet. When we switch over into paper space, I'll give a whole lecture on that. That's where they'll show up. So you can assign them in model space, but you won't see them yet. So don't panic when you say, I want this to be hidden and it doesn't show up. It'll be okay. We'll fix it a little bit later on. So for right now, I'm going to change that back to continuous like that. The next one over is line weight. It's currently set as default, but if I click on the line weights, I have a choice. These are done in millimeters, and you can see that we go all the way from 0.00 up to 2.11 millimeters. If you've worked in like the pigment liner pens or something like that, they often have a 0.3 or a 0.1 on them. Those are in millimeters, so you can get some crossover if you understand you've drawn in a 0.5 before you know how thick that line is, etc. So anyway, those are in millimeters. That is different than points, which is what Illustrator works in. So our dimensions here are different, and therefore our line weights are going to be a little bit different. We'll go through and we'll talk about line weights in a little bit when it comes to assigning them to the drawing. I'm going to go ahead and click Cancel here. There is the ability to make a layer transparent. I don't think I've ever used this, but it's there should you want to. 0 means it's opaque, so we're leaving it at 0. As we go over, there are still more options here. We have whether it's freeze or thawed in a new viewport. We'll get to what that means a little bit later on. So when it comes to actually creating your layers, you can create layers for whatever you want. You can name them whatever you want when it's your drawing. So right now you could create a layer for walls and you could just call it walls. If you go to work for a firm, there are standard layer names that typically a firm will have you adhere to. This improves consistency when you hand your drawing to somebody else and they hand it to somebody else. Furthermore, when you're working with consultants, an engineer, for example, a civil, a mechanical, an electrical, whatever, they will also create layers on your drawing and they will name their layers accordingly. And so there's a way of kind of setting this up. The way that is typical, and again, it's going to depend on what firm you're working for, is that things that belong to the architects or things that are architecture related will be A_something. So I'm going to start with my first layer. I'm going to go ahead and click on the new layer icon here, and I'm going to create a layer called A_wall for the walls. You could do a dash if you wanted to. Again, that would be dependent on the firm itself. Okay, so I have a wall. Then I could go through and I could create another layer for a door. I could create another layer for a window. You guys get how this is playing out, right? I could create another layer for a fixture. I could have a layer for a furniture. I can never spell it, so I just say a fern. It's a personal thing. And let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, that's enough for right now. So I ended up creating one extra layer. I'll delete that one. So I have a door, fixture, furniture, wall, and window. So obviously, these layers have certain purposes. The wall layer, for example, should have the walls on it. So as a way of kind of confirming that when I assign these, they're correct, I'm going to switch the color of the walls to magenta here. I'm going to take the rest of these and I'm going to change their color back to white. Typically, your layers inherit the properties below them. So when you create a new layer, depending on how you create it, it's going to inherit properties. It doesn't really matter because we're going to go through and change them. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work with that wall layer. I'll go ahead and close the Layer Properties Manager. And I'm going to come down to my drawing itself. And I'm going to select all of the walls. So this is a good opportunity to work through your selection methods. I'm going to go through and select all the walls. If you want to deselect something after you select it, so in that case I selected those and I want to deselect this, I'm going to hold down Shift on the keyboard and then select it. I do not have to hold down Shift to add to selection. It's going to default into adding to selection for me. And let's see, we're getting there. All right, so I've got all of those selected. At that point, I need to move layers. So with all of those selected, I'm going to come up to the home ribbon in the layer section, and I'm going to click the drop down here, and I'm going to switch from layer 0 to a wall. And when I do that, because I selected the color as being magenta, I can see where I missed. So like I missed this piece, I missed those pieces, I missed these pieces there, and that piece there, oop, that one there. And then I'll go up and I'll switch that to the A wall layer as well. The other option, which sometimes people choose to do, would be to turn on or off or freeze or thaw the wall layer. which is kind of an easy way of saying, okay, well, if it's off, then it must be on the correct layer. So I've temporarily turned it off. Either way works. It's kind of a personal preference here, etc. Now, as I look at this, I have windows here, but the window is divided in these locations. So really, those should all be selected and put on the wall layer as well. So we'll select those. A couple more right here. Good. That piece there. Those guys. Those windows right there. All right, looks pretty good. I'm going to switch all of those to the wall layer. So now I have all the walls selected. So this is a good opportunity to go ahead and turn off the walls, which leaves me things like windows and doors to work with. So I can go through and I can select the windows and the doors. We'll start with the doors. So I'll take the doors. I have these sliding doors as part of it, so we'll go ahead and select those too. I also have some closet doors. All right, so I've selected the doors. I'll come up to my layer my layer section of my home ribbon and switch those to the door layer. There we go. Those are on the door layer. I could then turn off the door layer and confirm that the doors went away. That's good. Next thing would be the windows. So there's a group of windows. There's a group of windows. There's a group of windows. And there's a group of windows. And I'll go ahead and switch those onto the window layer. The sink right here would be a fixture. So I'll go ahead and switch that onto the fixture layer. And the cabinets, I'm going to call furniture. So we'll select those cabinets and we'll put those onto the furniture layer. Sounds pretty good. That should be, those are my little thresholds. So really those should be on the doors layer. So we'll switch those to the door layer. All right, sounds good. So let me turn off the window. Let me turn off the fixture. Let me turn off the furniture. And we can see what is left. Oh, these guys need to be on the window layer. We'll switch them onto the window layer. Now the rest of these pieces, looks like these are probably walls that I missed. So we'll change and put those on the wall layer. All right, so the rest of these are little overhangs. So they're little overhangs. I'm going to need to change those and probably change the line types of those. So for right now, I'll just leave them on layer 0. We'll get to those in a little bit. So let me turn them all back on. Oops. There we go. I'm seeing my whole plan. And now I'm going to go ahead and start to assign some of the line weights for this. And so if I open up my layer properties again, we can work on our line weights. And the advantage of switching the layers so that you have doors, furnitures, etc., is it's pretty easy to say, okay, all the walls need to have a certain line weight. And so if you flip over the drawing, or if you look at that little cheat sheet that I have here, all of the walls themselves, there we go, wall, I'm suggesting it be 0.4 millimeters for thickness. So here in my Layer Properties Manager, I could say, okay, I want my walls to be 0.4 millimeters thick. And I'll go ahead and say, okay, that means everything that's on the wall layer is going to be 0.4 millimeters thick. Now, unfortunately, it hasn't shown up here yet. And some of you discovered this last class. You tried to assign a line weight and it hasn't shown up. You actually have to toggle the line weights on in AutoCAD to see them. So I'll go to the bottom right corner where I have those 3 little lines to customize my tray here. And I'm going to turn on line weight. There it is. And the line weight toggle is this one here. And so when I click that one, you'll see that all of my lines suddenly get thick, or at least they're supposed to be. Those lines there may have had their own thickness. No, I'm not quite sure why those aren't displaying. Let me look at the properties window here. Huh. I'm not sure why those aren't displaying correctly. They should be. But you can see that those line weights are on. So you can toggle the line weights on and off by clicking that little toggle there. Line weights below about 0.25 aren't going to show in the preview version. So you're just going to see them when you get to the final print. So let's go through and adjust the rest of our properties here. So the door, I actually have two different doors. I would just do everything at 0.18 millimeters. So I'm going to go to the door layer. We're going to change this to 0.18. There it is. We'll go ahead and say OK. My windows right here are going to be 0.00. Right there. 0.00 obviously is infinitely thin. It's just the thinnest line AutoCAD can make. So that's why it's 0.00. We'll go ahead and set that there. Let's see what else. My fixtures here I'm going to set at 0.00, I think. Let's see. No, I had a little thicker, 0.09. My furnishings were also at 0.09. All right, so that's good. Looks like I have a few missing little lines here, so obviously I have to go in and make a few corrections. There needs to be a line there, and there needs to be a line right there. This line and that line that I just drew should not be on layer 0. They should be on the furniture layer. There it is. Now, here's where line types come in. So these upper cabinets, because they're above the plane where I cut, need to be dashed lines. So I'll select those like that, and then I can come over here to the properties, and I can go to my line types, and I can choose hidden to as a line type. Again, they're not going to show up here, but I can specify that now, and then when we get to paper space, it'll show up. Furthermore, these overhangs, like this, and that, are also dashed lines, so I could go in and change those to hidden to as well. It's a little hard because you can't see them. One other thing to point out. So if I assign my line weights or line types by my layers here, that will apply to everything on the layer unless I individually select something and override it. So if I selected this piece of wall, I could come over to my properties on just this one line, and I could say, you know what, I want that one line to be really thick, and I could change that. So they're going to apply by default to all the objects on the layer, but you can override it on an individual basis should you want to. So for things like the upper cabinets here, they're still on the furniture layer. I just went in and said, no, I want this to be a specific line type, as opposed to changing them as a whole. So now that I have my line types correct, and I'm feeling comfortable with those, it's time to start kind of improving my drawing and adding things to add depth and character to this particular piece. One thing I do need to add here is I need to add a front door. I don't have any way of getting into the building. So I've got some issues with the plan, and we can work through what those issues are. But first, I want to go through and start adding some elements into this particular design. Now, could I sit down and draw, say, a toilet? Sure, I could sit down and draw a toilet. But the truth is, there are lots of drawings out there where people have already drawn toilets, and they've already drawn furniture. They've already drawn things that I want to put in my building. So it's a matter of finding those things and then putting them in. So we're going to go back online here, and first thing I'll do is frequently a manufacturer of a product will include a drawing for you to be able to use. So if I went to Kohler, for example, which is a fixtures manufacturer, and I said, okay, I want to go into the bathroom section, and I want to look at toilets, and I want a toilet, and I say, okay, I like this particular toilet. I don't know, I'm picking these at random. So let's say that I really like that toilet. If I scroll down here, under Really? They're not going to have it? That's new. Let me pick a different toilet. There we go. So usually under the specification section, of course I picked the wrong one, they have 2D CAD files. So here's my plan. I want the DWG version. So I'll go ahead and click on that DWG and it'll start to download that toilet. So there's the toilet. Let me go ahead and show it in my folder here. I'm going to take this, I'll copy it. I'm going to put it into my flash drive into today's folder. And actually, I have a whole folder. If I go into my resources, I have a folder called AutoCAD. Inside, I have a folder called Blocks. And then I store all of these blocks that I download in that folder to be able to reuse them. And so you can always go find a Kohler toilet, but once you've found one Kohler toilet, you can just use the Kohler toilet over and over. And so that ends up being useful. So I have a bathroom section. I have Kohler. You can see I have a few other toilets that I've already downloaded. We'll go ahead and paste this one in as another one, another option. There it is. So it's the 3589. Sometimes it's useful to go ahead and open that file and double check that it looks the way you think it should. So we'll go ahead and open that in AutoCAD. Yep, there you go. It looks like a toilet. That is a very non-exciting toilet. So they're better drawn than that. But anyway, it'll still work. Fixture. So with nothing selected, I'm going to switch my active layer to fixture. There it is. Then I'll go ahead and go to the insert ribbon. It's one over from home. There's insert. And this first option here, I'm going to click on insert block. And so what AutoCAD's doing is it's allowing me to reference another file. It's kind of like InDesign where I place something into my drawing. I'm doing the same thing here in AutoCAD. And I'm going to go browse for that, sorry, wrong folder, block, bathroom, 3589, there it is. You can see that I have other toilet options here as well. This one looks a little bit more fancy, so I'm going to use the 3946. I'll go ahead and say OK, and it's going to allow me to place the toilet into my drawing. So let's say that the toilet's going to go right there. I can then transform this toilet. I can rotate it. So I'll type rotate. And I could have it going this direction. Then I could move this so that's against that wall, etc. So you guys get the idea of how I can put that in. Now sometimes manufacturers don't have things that you want. In the case of a toilet, they typically would have if you go to the manufacturer. Sometimes you want just furniture. You want to show what the couch looks like in a room, etc. There are a series of blocks. If you just do a Google search for AutoCAD blocks, you're going to find a ton of them. I've found a website called First in Architecture to be pretty good at finding them. So First in Architecture, there we go. And they have, under CAD blocks, they have a bunch of CAD blocks. So I'm just going to click on the CAD blocks in general. And so you can kind of see things that they have. Some of which aren't relevant. So like small boats, probably not relevant for what we're doing. Let's see here. It's possible that some of these are paid. I'm not asking you to buy anything. Let's see. She's produced a lot more. So here's a free CAD blocks for chairs, for example. So I could click on that. And there's a bunch of chairs here. If I scroll down, she'll give us a preview of what the various chairs are. And I can download, we're going to be downloading in Imperial in terms of units. And when I do that, it's going to come down as a zip file. You go ahead and show it in its folder. There it is. I'm going to extract these. So let me go ahead and click on the extract extract all, and I'm going to put them on my flash drive in my resources folder, and again in my AutoCAD Blocks folder. Let's call this chairs. And then I can go ahead and put it in there. Good. There it is. So now I can go back to AutoCAD. And so this one gets a little bit different. When she creates these block files, they have a bunch of blocks within one file. So when I go to load it, so it's the same thing. I'm in the Insert ribbon. I click on Insert. There we go. I'm going to click on Browse. We'll back all my way out to Chairs. There's the chairs. We'll say Open and OK. When I go ahead and click it, it's going to give me all the chairs. I don't want all the chairs, but they are in my file now. So I can delete those. Then when I come back up to Insert here, you can see that they're all preloaded for me. And I can scroll through all of these various chairs. And I can say, OK, I would like to install that chair. And I can then click on where it goes in my drawing. And why didn't it show up for me? Try that again. Wow, didn't that turn out nice? Oh, there you go. So it appears that she didn't reorient where the origin was. So we have to do some fancy moving on these chairs. So let me take those guys. We'll move them back over to my drawing. There we go. And then we'll place those chairs in the building wherever I want them to go. So let's put this one, we'll put it in that corner. Maybe we'll rotate it. Maybe like that. Take this one and we'll move this one. Same kind of thing. And we'll rotate it. Like that. So you might want beds, you might want other furniture. They're all available, and like I said, if you do a search, let's see if she has them separated by free CAD blocks. No, you're going to just have to keep looking. I know I've downloaded beds in here before. Yeah, there's furniture, there's sofas, there's beds, etc. Oh, there you go. There's the beds and wardrobes, so you can use those as an example. You can also create your own blocks. There are a few blocks that I've spent some time creating myself. If you want to, I'm not going to go into that because it's a little bit more of an ordeal. I'm just encouraging you to go find them. Again, the same process is always the same. If you need to load another file, you can click on More Options. I'm going to go ahead and browse. Come on. There we go. But everything decided to work really slow for me now. Come on, AutoCAD. All right, so there's a bed, like that. Once you've inserted a block, you can also copy it. So I can take the same thing, I can copy it, and I can put it down into this room. Say something like that. In this particular block, no, it doesn't have any options with it. Okay. So anyway, you can go find those. You can add the furniture, etc. The last thing that I want to show you is that you can also use hatches to do things like what the flooring would look like or what have you. I've included this part 3 as optional because depending on what blocks you have in your space, it may or may not work to where this will actually be an effective method. To do that, we're going to use a tool called the Hatch tool. It's available right here in my home ribbon. So I'll click on Hatch. And what a Hatch tool does is it allows us to fill in a particular region. So right now it's set for this pattern, but I could look here at the rest of my different patterns. So let's say that I wanted kind of a brick pattern, something like that. It would show up as a brick pattern there. I can go ahead and click inside the regions where I wanted it. So if I wanted all of those to be this brick pattern. Now I can also change. So once it's selected like that, I can say, you know what, I'd rather have this pattern. But in this case, when I switch to this pattern, I'm not seeing it. So I would need to adjust the scale right here. Let's try it at 5. Now it's starting to appear. Let's try it at 10. Still not. 20. 40. And eventually I'd get to the point where I'd see that pattern. 50, etc. So I just keep going until I find the pattern and the scale that I want. There are lots of patterns available to you. Some of these are designed for section, like the earth pattern you wouldn't use in this context. So I would stick with the basic patterns. Parallel lines, if you wanted to do flooring, for example, you could do parallel lines like this. You can also change the rotation. Let's see, I might need to adjust my scale. Let's go back to 1. Nope, still reading as solid. No, let's go the opposite way. Nope. Still not showing. All right, well, maybe that's a bad one. There we go. That one isn't going to look like floor. Why is it not? There we go. There's the one with the flooring in it. For some reason, it was reading the solid. So in this case, if I wanted this to go, let's make those a little bit bigger. Let's go to 30. I don't want them on the 45 degree. I can change the angle right here. I could say, let's change the rotation so that they're going horizontal, or let's change the rotation negative. Oh, it's not going to let me do that. What would it be, 135? There we go, so they were going horizontal. So you can change that rotation, and you can change the scale of these. Once you have it set up the way you want it, I'm going to go back to the kind of long brick pattern here. And we'll set that back at 1. There we go. Once you're done, you can go ahead and close the hatch creation. And typically on a hatch, you want it to be much lighter than everything else. So we'll put this on the fixtures layer. So let me go back to home. Actually, I'll put it on the furniture layer. And then I'm going to override the color. I'm going to come over here into color, and I'm going to choose one of these gray values. And I think I specify a 251 gray. It's not showing us those. We would do it. Let's see if we can get the full color palette. More colors. There we go. So there's a 251 gray. The reason that I suggest certain grays is I know how they tend to print and whether they'll look good or not. So if I switch it over to that, you can tell that's a little bit lighter. It kind of fades into the background a little bit. So you can go through and you can do this exact thing with your whole building. So I could go back to hatch. And I could say that I want this, this, that, that, like that. But the inside of the building, I'd rather have let's do it with like a hardwood. And I want that rotation to be 135, so it's going horizontal. I could go ahead and close it. I could take this and again go back to home, go back to my colors. That was my recent color right there. And so now I have a little bit of flooring there as well. But like I said, you may run into trouble with the blocks. In this case, the blocks had no problem. It read right around the blocks and filled them in. Some people, depending on how they create the blocks, you may have difficulty where it'll go inside the block and it won't quite work, in which case I would just say don't do it or pick another block, because fixing somebody's block where there's holes doesn't it's just not worth your time. Before you put the flooring in though, put the rest of the furniture in, so there's always levels and in terms of what's important. So I would do the flooring very last if it's there. We already talked about line weights and installing the line weights. When you're done, you're going to publish to web JPEG. Before I publish this one, I want to switch my magenta back. So we'll go back to my layer properties. Magenta here is going to go back to white. Remember, it's index color 7, not index color 255. So go back to index color 7.
Question.
Yep.
Why is it an index different to the RGB the same?
Because the index color 7 is referencing the fact that this one is going to change. This is what it's showing on the screen, 255, but when it prints, it's going to flip. So it's kind of a special color because it's designed to be black. The problem is if we chose black, this is actually a very dark gray. If we chose black, you'd never see it on the screen. So it's a special color that's designed to flip to enhance your ability to view and to work. So that's the difference. So we'll go ahead and say, OK, there. My topography needs to change. That's going to go to white as well. Now, I also have this topo line running through my building. So this is a good place to use trim. So if I select this line, and if I select this line there, I can then type in trim and get rid of that segment right there. So I haven't selected everything. I just did the outermost and the outermost. And then I can click trim and get rid of that line that goes through my building, like that. At this point, it's time to go ahead and print it, also known as save a JPEG. So we'll go up to the printer icon right here. I'm going to change my printer and plotter name to be the publish to web JPEG. Default paper size. I'm going to change my plot area to be a window. And I'll draw a window around my drawing. There it is. I'm going to choose fit to paper. But there's one other thing that's important because now we have line weights. Under the plot style table, I'm going to switch to the first option, which is the acad.ctb file. And that will allow me to have these line weights show up. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. We'll cover that a little bit later on in the class, but I figured I'd point it out for right now. I'll go ahead and say OK. It'll ask me where to save it. So let's go ahead and save it on my flash drive. And there it is. I can go ahead and click on Save. Perfect. And then we could go take a look at it to see what it would look like. So let's see here. There it is, the fall 2019. I can open that one up. And so now, once it prints out, you can kind of see, did the line weights work? Am I reading the line weights? Do they feel correct or not? That kind of thing. There's a few mistakes, like there's an extra line here. There's an extra line right here that's causing these to not read as well as they otherwise could. Likewise, I've got a few lines that are too close together that are just reading too tight. So there might be some clarification necessary. Make sense? OK, so you get the rest of the day to kind of polish up your plan. Try to get it done. Next class, we're going to move on into elevation views, in which case we don't want to be working on the plan anymore.